Hello, everyone. So yeah, as Shruti said, my name is Ryan, and I'm working in developer relations at Prisma. Prisma, you may be familiar with if you're in the GraphQL world, because you may have known of it from its early days, its inception as GraphQL. GraphQL was kind of like this backend as a service, which gave you a GraphQL API based on a schema that you would create, and you could manage all of that in like a user interface and have a database that would give you data that's exposed with this GraphQL API. That's changed now. So we no longer do that sort of thing. Instead, Prisma, if you go to prisma.io, we give you tools to make working with databases easier. And so what that looks like is a set of tools. There's a whole bunch of things that go into Prisma, but one of the things that you would find with Prisma when you first start using it is you would find things like this. You would find this thing that looks like an ORM. We don't really call it an ORM, but it's this client that you can use to create data and read data and interact with your data in every way that you would want to. And instead of you writing SQL queries or doing manual queries yourself, you have that taken care of for you. And the really nice part about it is that it is all type safe. So that's really where Prisma shines, is that it becomes very difficult to make an invalid query. You have a database client that is really mapped well to your actual data structure. It's difficult for you to do invalid queries with that. So Prisma, not directly related to GraphQL anymore, but of course you are probably going to need to access data from a database to serve the queries that your GraphQL clients make to your GraphQL API. And Prisma can come in handy when you're doing that. In fact, we're still somewhat involved in the GraphQL community with various tools that we author and help author. One of them that you'll probably have heard of, perhaps, maybe not, but maybe you've heard of it, is Nexus. So there's this tool called Nexus Schema, and this gives you a way to write your GraphQL APIs in a bit of a different way. And when I say different, what I mean is that I think when we're coming to GraphQL and we're getting started with it, we probably see something like this. This is an Apollo server, and it's doing things in an Apollo server kind of way, right? So we've got a set of type definitions. We're using this GQL tool coming from Apollo server to give a string, which is our type definitions. That's the schema for our database, for our GraphQL API. And then we map up a set of resolvers. We tell our post query, for example, how it should resolve, what it should do when a query for it is made. And in this case, we just send back a couple posts in an array, or a list, if you will. And then we create our server. So, this is what might be considered the canonical way of doing a GraphQL API, mostly because this is one of the first examples that we see. But this isn't the only way of doing it. And what I'll show you today is one way that we like to do things and how we keep things type safe in the process. So I'll show you how to think about writing a GraphQL server using Nexus schema. And it's a bit different. It works in kind of a code first way, is what we say. So instead of writing a schema using the schema definition language and then writing a set of resolvers, you do everything all in one shot with code. So no use of the SDL. You do it all in code, and then you can make your queries to your GraphQL API as you would. So this API that we've got here is working. We've got a couple posts coming back. So why don't we start by changing this up for a Nexus schema-based API. And then we're going to bring in Prisma. We're going to see how Prisma kind of ties in with this and can make the whole experience quite nice. So what I'll do is I'll come into a new terminal here, and I'm going to install Nexus schema. So we'll do npm install @nexus/schema. And so that's going. And what we'll do now is come down here. I'll just kill that so I can restart it once I've got things going. I'm going to import things from Nexus schema. I want to import something called object type and something called make schema. comes from @Nexus schema. So the idea with Nexus schema, what you're going to do is use, you're generally going to use this tool, object types, to describe the shape of your API and also tell it how it should resolve with data. So what we can do to start out here is we can come down and let's give ourselves a post type. We can say we want a constant called post, and that's going to be an object type. And there's going to be a couple of things to configure here. We need to give our object types a name. So much like we would give our post type here a name of post, we can say that for our object type, the name is post. And then we want to give it some definition. So we've got this method called definition. And using this T argument here, we can set up the various fields that we would have for our post. We would have an ID. So generally, all of our data is going to be keyed by an ID. We'd have a string called title. So that maps up to our title down here. And then finally, a string called body. Oops. String body. So there is our post type. What we would have to do is give ourselves a query type. So much like we would do in our schema definition language and then map up in our resolvers, we'd have an object type for query. So we'll give that a name of query and then definition on that as well. In the definition here for our query, we're going to say that we want a list of a certain field. And we're going to call this post. This is going to be the query that we make to get access to this data. We're going to say the return type is post. And then finally, this is the exit point here. We want to resolve with something. And just like we would resolve with some data down here in our kind of Apollo flavor resolvers, we can just grab this array. Let's copy this over here. And let's resolve with that data. So the resolve function here, you know, it's got the same kind of signature that you would see in your Apollo resolvers, right? Your parent, your args, context, and info. So that stuff is there like you would expect, and you can do the same kinds of things you would expect with an Apollo server. Now, the kicker here is that this is all actually going to run through an Apollo server. So with Nexus schema, you can run it through through any server you want, really, any kind of GraphQL server you want. You just have to make sure that you can do something like this, where you would give yourself a schema, which calls make schema, which comes from Nexus schema. We've got this make schema import. So with make schema, what we're going to do is we're going to provide it a set of types. The first type that we can give it should be post and then query. So those are the definitions of the object types that we've described above. So we've got our schema there. Let's pass schema now to Apollo server. We still have this Apollo server set up. So we just pass it our new schema, which is using these two new things we've created with Nexus, and we should be good to go. We can do npm run dev. See if we get this running for us. And back over here, if we hit go again, we're still getting things coming through. Let's just prove that out. Yep, we're still getting our posts. So this is pretty cool. What we've got now is, instead of having separately managed schema definition language files and separately managed resolvers, both things kind of take place in one go. So we've got you know, everything happening schema definition wise and resolver definition wise happening in the same place. What you might be wondering is like, well, how does this actually, you know, benefit you? What benefit does this have? A lot of people like the fact that you don't have to hop between files to do those things. But more so than that, what you get with Nexus is some really neat things for strongly typing your whole app. So what we can do here, when we make a schema, we can set some outputs. And on the outputs, we can say we want to output our schema. And here's what we'll do. We'll put it in dir name, generated, and let's go to Nexus, and we'll go to schema.graphql. And we'll see this in operation in just a second, but we also want to output something else, which is going to be type gen. So type gen, as the name implies, is going to generate some TypeScript types for us. Say that'll be called nexus.ts. So if we save this, right away what we should see is our types being generated. So we come up here to our generated file. Let's take a look in here. We've got schema.graphql, and this is taking the API that we've created for ourselves here with object types, and it's giving us some schema definition language automatically generated for us. So that's really cool because now we can use this GraphQL schema definition language, and we can put it, we can use tools like we get in VS Code, where we get some kind of IntelliSense for our GraphQL clients to be able to know which fields each of these types might contain. And so that makes things easier for our client-side developers. We also get our TypeScript types. So this is very cool because now we have a way of strongly typing our application. We can pull in these types, and we can say that they have to abide by what has been generated for us here. And we didn't have to do any extra work for that. There was no going through and manually creating those types. It's just everything is generated. So that's very cool. So we've got static data here. What we should do is hook up a database, and Prisma really shines here. Let's see how we can hook that up. So coming into a new terminal window here, let's do npm install, and I'll save one thing. It'll be the Prisma CLI as a dev dependency. Prisma CLI, set of command line tools for you to create your Prisma project, manage it, run migrations, that sort of thing. And then as a regular dependency, I'm going to install at Prisma client. So Prisma client is the place where you interact with your database, really, when you're using Prisma. You're going to create a Prisma client. It's going to have all the type information for your database based on a model that you create, and it's going to give you lots of tooling to make safe database queries. First step, if we're doing something with Prisma, is Prisma init. So we do Prisma init, and over here we have a new folder called Prisma. A couple files that come with it, an environment file. It's got like a hard-coded database URL. Defaults to Postgres, but Prisma supports lots of stuff. So we got Postgres, we've got SQLite, MySQL. There are some more. Head over to prisma.io to see all of the options there. Nothing for NoSQL yet. So if you're using things like Mongo, nothing there yet, but there are plans in the works for that to support both relational and non-relational databases. And what's cool is if you have multiple different databases, maybe they're in different flavors, you're going to end up with a common interface for all those databases. So I'll change up my string here. I've got a Postgres database that is running in the background here. Let me just switch things up so that I'm pointing to it. So that's my database URL. And now in schema.prisma, this is a file that uses the Prisma schema language, the PSL. And you use it to describe what your data should look like, what your database should look like. The first thing you might be interested in would be a model. This is going to give you a table in your database. So you'd want to set up a model called post, for example, if we're dealing with blog posts. You'd want an ID. An ID, in my case, I'm going to say that an ID should be a string. We're going to mark it with an ID, the ID decorator here. And then we want to have it default to something. And I will have it default to a CUID. So this is kind of a collision-resistant universal ID. You've got the option as well if you want to use a UUID, so universal unique ID. The CUID is a bit shorter. I like to use that one. What else? We need some fields, some columns for our table. So let's have a title. And that's going to be a string. And then body will be a string as well. Oops. There we go. You get auto formatting with your Prisma schema files if you've got the plugin installed with VS Code. So on save, it's going to auto format for you. It does much more than that too. When you are setting up relations between different tables, you're going to have some automatically generated code run. You're going to have some code automatically generated for your file when you save it. Okay, so that's all we need for our Prisma schema file. So what we want to do now is generate some migrations. And I'll show you the API here. This is under an experimental flag, subject to change. So, with anything experimental, we say use with caution. But it would look like this. You would do Prisma migrate, save, and pass the experimental flag. And Oops, it looks like we have not saved this. There we go. So I had to save my environment file because that user didn't exist. Yeah, Prisma migrate save experimental asks for your name for the migration. I'm going to say this is the initial migration. What gets generated from that is this file here with some information about your migration. In the README, you'll see what the SQL basically looks like for Prisma to create the tables that will go into your database based on your model. So with those migrations in place, we can run them. We can do Prisma migrates up, run the experimental flag, of course. And now if we go over to our database here and refresh, it might be hard to see. I don't think I can zoom in on my my Table Plus client here, but we've got post, we've got migration. So migration is a table that has information about the migrations that have run and their status, etc. But we've got our post table. So that's ready to accept some data. So what you could do then is over in server.ts, we could start using the Prisma client. Well, let's import Prisma client from @Prisma client. And let's get an instance of it. Const Prisma equals a new Prisma client. All right. Now, under different circumstances, I might show you how to do things where you put your Prisma client onto context for your Apollo server here. So you might do something like this, where you have your Prisma client. Oops, not context. I meant to say Prisma. You have your Prisma client on context. And with that, you could then pick it up on the context argument, right? So if you had args and then context, you could pick up Prisma on context, but I've been fighting with this thing this morning here, and it's not giving me the type hints that I wanted to when I run it through context. So in lieu of that, what we're going to do is just use Prisma kind of directly here within our resolvers. But normally you would kind of pick it up off of context after you set it up. Could be some issue in the version of Prisma matching not being the most recent in Nexus schema. I'm not too sure, but in any case, what we could do when we want to resolve with some post data now is we could say Prisma. Looks like it's not giving me any type hints, and I wonder if it's because we need to generate Prisma generate. And I will just restart the TS server just to be safe. Prisma, there we go. So this is, where a ton of the benefit of Prisma comes in, is you get this strongly typed database client that gives you things like IntelliSense, and it gives you auto completion and this sort of thing. So you can look for what's available on your Prisma client, and I have posts available because I've described that on my model. And on posts, I've got a number of methods that I can call. And maybe if we're trying to resolve all of our posts, we can just choose find many. And so let's save that. And now if I go over here and I hit go again, I've got no posts. I should expect that because there's nothing in the database yet. So we can actually go and create some posts, and maybe let's do that next. Let's go over here. We'll work with a mutation now. So we've got our post object type that describes our actual, our object type with the fields that we want. We've got a query with one query that we can make to get all of our posts. And what we would want perhaps now is a mutation. So const mutation equals an object type. And we'll give it a name of mutation. And we'll give it some definition. So when we're dealing with mutations, things look a little bit different, I suppose, than you would see with if you're setting this up through your SDL and your resolvers. There's a few more keys that you might work with here when you're creating. So you could do tfield and call it create post. So that's going to create a single post. And then you would pass an object to give it some configuration. The return type will be post. So whenever we create a post, we want to have the client be able to query for information about that post. So the ID, title, name, etc. We want to take some arguments, right? So from our clients, our GraphQL clients, we want to be able to take in some arguments, and we'll want title. It's going to be one of them. That's going to be a string arg. This is an import from Nexus schema, string arg. And that's going to now allow us to take a string arg. We want to say nullable is false. We don't want to allow that argument to be null. It has to be there. So that'd be like putting the exclamation point in your schema definition language to say that a field is required. So title, and we want body as well. Okay, we've got our arguments. We also want to resolve with something. Arguments come here in the second position. We can destructure them out. We can have title and body. That's how we pull those arguments off. And we can have context. In this case, we're not going to need it. Again, I would normally be using Prisma through the context argument there, but today we'll just use it kind of directly. And we will, I've got to do that. We will straighten things out there. We will return Prisma post, and then we've got create. So we've got this create method. And if you're looking, like if you're using Prisma and you're like, I don't really, I'm developing against the database, I want to create something or read some data and you don't really know what's available there, you can do Control Spacebar. And that will give you a list here in VS Code of what's available to put in. So the first one is going to be data when you're creating something. Data is an object. And then Control Spacebar again says, okay, I've got two things I can put in here. Title, so my first post, and the other one, body. Okay, cool. So we've got those now. And let's see. So we're returning that. I'm going to just get rid of this here. And why don't we see if we can get this to go for us? So, and in fact, instead of hard coding this in here, why don't we just use title directly from the client? We'll do that instead. It'll take title and body as arguments. Okay, so over in our playground, let's run a mutation, and I'm just going to refresh so we make sure we've got the make sure we know about our API. So create post, and it looks like it's not giving me what I would expect. So I just wonder if there's anything I need to do here. Just wondering if there's an error. I want to check my schema. So it didn't generate for me in my schema here. And I'll double check here what we've got. Ah, I see. It's because I did not yet put the mutation into my schema. So I defined it, but I now have to put it down here into my types array for my schema. So saving that now. And looking into schema.graphql, now I've got the mutation with create post. Okay, so back over here, we'll try this one more time. We've got create post that needs a title, my first post, and body. First post, body. And then I can get some info back. I can get ID, I can get title, and body. And let's hit go. There we go. So we've got an ID, title, body. In our database, if we refresh here, we can see that first record. It's hard to see again because everything is so tiny up there, but there it is. It's in our database. And now if we were to query for our data once more, and we could say post, ID, title, and body. There we have it. We've got our post coming back. So that's a really easy way to work with your database. Prisma gives you everything you would want. Now, there is a lot of stuff you could do to sort of tie things in between Nexus and Prisma and get things like CRUD. So CRUD resolvers are something that are offered through Nexus Schema. And with that, you can have automatically generated resolvers for you. So if you had a resource, say you had like a well, the resource that we have here, which is our post table. If you opted into this experimental feature, it's marked as experimental, but you could have CRUD resolvers, which would give you things like create one post or find many posts, these kinds of things, right? So that is a productivity boost for sure, especially, getting back to the heart of the topic here is when you are experimenting, when you're prototyping, you want to move quickly, and having tools like Prisma and like Nexus helps you to ultimately write less code. That's sort of the goal here. Write less code, do more stuff with that code that you write. And so if you're prototyping, you move quicker. It allows you to move much more quickly. And you also get the benefit that you're type safe. And you get this kind of for free. Like this is, as long as you're writing TypeScript, as long as you're using .ts as an extension, you get a whole lot of benefit here for free. And it just so happens that those benefits start to come in handy when you get past the prototyping phase. When you're going to production, when your application starts to get larger, when you have more team members coming on, all of those things, you're really going to benefit from the type safety that you get from Prisma and from Nexus. So once again, Nexus is a different approach to writing your GraphQL API. It's different in that you're not using the schema definition language to write how your API is shaped, and then writing a set of resolvers to describe how data comes out of your API. Instead, you do that all in one shot, like we've done here. And then Prisma, it's a great tool set for your database. It maps up to all sorts of relational databases, and you get your types generated for you. One thing that I'm realizing I didn't show, which I'll show quickly here, is like, how does Prisma know about the typings for your database? If you go into node modules and then into the .prisma file and then index.d.ts, this is the type generation file that Prisma handles. So we could look for type post, for example. And here is the type for our post model that we created in our Prisma schema. And then there's all sorts of other types that get generated automatically, like how you can query your database. So like where, that's a certain clause that you would use for database querying, all sorts of other things, lots of really cool stuff in here. So I invite you to check out prisma.io. That's where you'll find lots of really cool stuff about Prisma. The Nexus stuff, you can go to nexusjs.org to check out how Nexus and Prisma can be used more closely together. Here's me on Twitter. This is where you can find me at Ryan Chenkie. And come say hi there. DMs are open if you want to say hi there. And as Shruti mentioned, I've got this course on React security. So I just recently launched this. If you're doing React and you're interested in how to secure your React application, you can come check out this course. I've got like all sorts of information about JSON Web Tokens, how you would set up security for your app, etc. So that is about it for me.